So today I'm delighted to be here as part of the celebrations of the 125th anniversary. And I've been asked to share with you some of the Met's story and reflections on where we're going in the future. But I'll start with giving you a sense of the Met's founding. The story of the Met is uniquely American and begins in Paris almost 150 years ago. In 1866, the year after the end of the American Civil War, a group of Americans came together in Paris for a 4th of July celebration. Reflecting on the impressive European collections established through centuries of royal patronage, they decided that America needed an art museum of its own, and the idea of the Metropolitan Museum was born. It would become a reality 4 years later, in 1870. At the time, what little exposure the average American had to a museum was usually in the form of a local hall of science, where there was an appetite for anything bizarre or grotesque, often including the bones of a woolly mammoth or a wax reenactment of some celebrated crime. In the earliest years of the 19th century, American artist Charles Willson Peale's famous museum in Philadelphia showed thousands of natural curiosities, including 2 excavated mummies. When the Met was incorporated in 1870, in this modest building, it did not own a single work of art. It was an aspiration based on European models, but fueled by new democratic ideals that influenced much of the development of the United States in the late 19th century. In creating an encyclopedic museum, not a museum of American art or American culture, the founders were not only placing themselves within a European tradition, but also placing themselves firmly within a global context. In the wake of the Civil War, there was something unifying about this effort, a new institution for a new nation. And there was something uniquely modern and American about the fact that that aspiration was accessible to everyone, no matter what class or cultural tradition they came from. And remember, all Americans, except Native Americans, did come from somewhere else. In a city of immigrants in search of opportunity, a new national identity would emerge, one that was both culturally diverse and singularly American. These ambitions were also stimulated by the specific circumstances of the time. New York, at the moment of the Met's founding, was plagued by riots, overcrowded slums, and rampant political corruption. More than 8 million people arrived in the US from 1855 to 1890, all through New York. In the midst of this chaos, boundless faith was placed in education as a cure for these ills. These discussions took on an almost religious fervor, formulated around the idea that the cultivation of one's capacity to perceive beauty saw direct benefits to health, character, and community. So, from the very beginning, we see the Met enshrining education for the public at the core of its purpose. Of course, the Met's formative years were not without their growing pains, and through the decades, shifts in priorities and leadership have inflected the museum in many ways. It was initially thought that the museum would not be able to collect original masterpieces, so an extensive collection of plaster casts was formed. And despite its mission to educate the masses in the early days, the Met was only open during hours that exactly coincided with the working day. After years of discussion, the museum finally opened for the public on Sundays in 1889. Electric lighting was introduced in 1890, allowing for evening hours. In the subsequent decades, education took many forms, from a trade school to teach people arts such as carriage decoration, all the way through to modern dance in the galleries in the 1970s. But what has remained constant through all these shifts is that early international approach to visual culture, manifest in a deep commitment to scholarship and supported by a unique American philanthropic tradition that has brought the Met unparalleled financial resources, magnificent works of art, and significant growth over the decades. These images of the Met from 1895, actually this is 1902, sorry, this is 1895. Here you see 1902, 1920, 1955, and 1991 show the museum's ambitious physical expansion over the years. More recent projects have included renovated galleries for American and Islamic art, new facilities for the Costume Institute, and a new plaza in front of the museum, as well as the reinstallation of our European painting galleries. On the horizon are new galleries for British decorative arts and the rethinking of the Met's southwest wing, where our modern and contemporary collections are housed. This last project is a major initiative that we have commissioned architect David Chipperfield to lead. We've just completed the conceptual design phase, but of course it will be many years in the making. And, as Sabina mentioned, we have also taken on an additional building this year. In addition to the main building and the cloisters, there is now the Met Breuer. This is the Marcel Breuer designed building that formerly was home to the Whitney Museum before they moved downtown. The Met has signed an agreement that we will operate the building for at least the next 8 years, possibly renewable. We opened the Met Breuer on March the 18th, after spending several months restoring the building. Indeed, it was like having a large-scale sculpture in conservation. We pulled back the long-term wear and debris, cleaned the lights, polished the bronze, restored the floors, but kept the patina, allowing Marcel Breuer's wonderful details to emerge. It was a real privilege to enjoy the building while it was empty. So what are we doing in this new space? The goal of the program at the Met Breuer will be to explore modern and contemporary art through the lens of our historic and global collections. The Met always intended to tell the continuing story of art into the present. That interest in modern and contemporary has waxed and waned over the years, but we are now committed to examining how today's artists have built upon or rejected the traditions and expressions represented in our historic holdings. And I think a great example of this is provided by our first show at the Met Breuer, titled Unfinished, Thoughts Left Visible, which is on view until September. And I'm going to show you a little sizzle reel that gives you a flavor of this exhibition.
In this exhibition, there are really two kinds of objects. There are works of art that are literally unfinished, and then there are works of art that only appear unfinished.
The exhibition begins in the Renaissance, and we go all the way up to works of art that are being created for us right now. So it's a grand sweep.
The fact that all of these objects live together in the same exhibition is unusual, it's curious, and it's exciting.
We show a fantastic painting by Alice Neal. We know now that the sitter never came back for his second sitting. He was about to go off to the Vietnam War. We have this beautiful portrait of somebody whose life was being interrupted.
Unfinished works of art always leave behind traces of the artistic process, whether it's an underlying sketch or a patch of bare canvas. And so when viewers are walking through Unfinished, they'll be able to imagine themselves standing behind the artist, watching them make, unmake, change, and edit.
The viewer's imagination is necessary to complete these works.
To me, it's amazing to see works of art like this Titian hanging in a building that we've so long associated with modern American art. And I think for our visitors, this conjunction of modern, of historical and contemporary has been revelatory. You really see the way that the modern artists are inspired by the historic traditions. But it makes you look at the historical works with fresh eyes. I think we all fall into that trap of it's an old master, and you see it as an old master, and you forget, you lose sight of the verve, the originality, the groundbreaking nature of the works of the past. The other inaugural Breuer exhibition is on an Indian artist called Nazreen Mohammadi, and surveys her work as she toiled in post-independence India. One of our interests at the Met Breuer is connecting contemporary practice with the global range of our historic collection. This show is closing soon, but it's been wonderful to spend time with these thoughtful works. And again, I'm going to show you a little video that just captures the spirit.
Nazreen Mohammadi was an Indian artist, and this is going to be the first retrospective of her work in America. She did work over only 3 decades, but during those 3 decades she traveled enormously and produced a phenomenal body of work. Here is an artist seemingly working in isolation, but actually with something fundamental and powerful to contribute to the story of modernism. She ends up having a kind of practice that is completely unexpected, particularly when you think about the very colorful, figurative works, the long history of Indian painting, and then you come across Nazreen. So it really makes us expand our understanding of what Indian painting and Indian art is. She was able to deal with sophisticated and complex ideas with very fundamental and basic forms. That's all she needed to create worlds in her work. It's an odyssey of an artist who, despite all the difficulties, was intent on creating work that really made a difference. And that is both personally very impressive, but also artistically, well, you can see for yourself.
To link the Met's main building and the Met Breuer, we had Pulitzer Prize-winning composer John Luther Adams compose a sound walk for download that takes 9 minutes and 9 seconds, theoretically the time he decided it takes to walk between the two buildings. The piece was composed from 100 sound bites that members of the public submitted to him, and he blended them together. So if any of you are visiting New York over the summer, I hope you'll download it and experience that too. The Met Breuer program will continue later this summer with Diane Arbus in the beginning. This opens in July. The show focuses on the artist's first 7 years working with the camera on the streets of New York City between 1956 and 1962. The majority of the photographs will be drawn from the Met's vast Diane Arbus archive, which we acquired in 2007. And these works are largely unknown. More than half of the photographs have never been previously exhibited or published. So it's a real treat in store for those who are, fascinated by this great American photographer. Of course, it's not all modern and contemporary at the Met. In the main building this spring, we have Pergamon and the Hellenistic kingdoms of the ancient world, focusing on 3 centuries following the conquests of Alexander the Great, and really looking at the 3rd and 2nd and 1st centuries BC, during the height of the Hellenistic period's astonishing wealth, artistry, and technical achievements. There's a special emphasis in the exhibition on the ancient city of Pergamon, capital of the Attalid dynasty, which ruled over large parts of Asia Minor. And this project is the result of a historic collaboration between the Met and the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, which is lending 1/3 of the show from its celebrated collection. Also on view is Court and Cosmos, the great age of the Seljuks. Originating in Central Asia, the Seljuk dynasty established a vast empire that spread from Turkmenistan to the Mediterranean Sea from the 11th to the 13th centuries AD. Under Seljuk rule, the exchange and synthesis of diverse traditions accompanied economic prosperity, advances in science and technology, and a flowering of culture within the realm. The exhibition includes superb examples of ceramics, glass, stucco, works on paper, and textiles, all from a part of the world that today is mainly associated with political turmoil. And finally, in this little commercial to encourage you to travel to New York, I'd say our annual Costume Institute exhibition is titled Manus Ex Machina, Fashion in an Age of Technology. And this is a project that looks at the way that contemporary designers deploy both hand and machine-made techniques in their creative process. I think all too often we assume that machine-made is off the peg, mass production, and handmade is haute couture. And what this exhibition really demonstrates is the way that the leading designers are blending machine and handmade to give really remarkable new creations. Now, I'm going to turn to the digital sphere. Because in a way, I think the digital realm is a whole new universe, impacting, of course, everyone's lives, but impacting museums in very profound ways. As we look at the museum that evolved from those early aspirations I described, I think we're proud that the Met's collection now includes over 5,000 years of art from every corner of the globe, and our audience has grown to over 6 million visitors, as Sabina mentioned. But this pales in comparison to our online development. We have something like 35 million visitors to our main website, and then tens of millions more coming to our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter feed, and so on. It's a whole new realm. Among the most important opportunities over the past decade has been the global audience that we access online. Last year, we reached people in over 230 countries through the website. I recognize that some of these people may never make it to New York to stand in our galleries and have that extraordinary experience that only an original work of art can deliver, or that they may only visit the Met once or twice in their lives. But imagine if we look beyond that model and think about the relationship that someone can have with the Met all the time as a lens through which they can see and interpret the world. And we're working hard to pursue that idea. First, through the provision of information, accurate, scholarly, authoritative information. We hear again and again that that is what brings people back to our website. It's reliability, and it shows in the numbers. Something like 1.5 million people come to our website each month through looking at essays on our timeline of art history, which is a time-based analysis of our collection that includes nearly 1,000 essays on topics ranging from cults in ancient Greece and Rome all the way through to contemporary fashion. Likewise, every catalogued object in our collection is now online in our collections database. So something like 450,000 works of art. The vast uncatalogued number are engravings and prints and what we call ephemera, posters, postcards, and so on. And our drawings and prints department is working very hard to get this vast volume of material digitized. We've also got every publication that the Met has made, dating back to 1960, available online. So over 1,500 titles. And we've had something like 20 million page views for these digital publications since we launched. It's an amazing resource. Truly, I think we're breaking ground here. We also have information on our international work in a feature called The Met Around the World. And we've recently launched a section titled Met Collects that features recent additions to the collection. The Met is very actively growing its collection all the time through purchases and through gifts. So, reliable information is one cornerstone. Another is voices. The Met famously used to be one voice, the voice of Philippe de Montebello, my predecessor. And many of you who used the audio tours at the Met in the past will remember his sonorous, charismatic voice. But my appointment coincided with a moment, the electronic revolution, when it was possible to bring out many voices. And so I've really concentrated in trying to open up the museum behind the walls since I became director. So we've been experimenting. One of our first experiments, published 4 years ago, was a web feature called Connections, in which 100 staff from across the museum, curators, guards, me, we chose themes, not art historical themes, but more subjective themes: dogs, survival, bad hair days. And we looked at objects that spoke to that topic. And we released episodes over the course of the year, 2 each week. Each was 4 minutes long, and the result was, for us, groundbreaking. And I'm going to play you a snippet by the former head of our Egyptian department, Dorothea Arnold, talking about survival.
I'm Dorothea Arnold from the Department of Egyptian Art at the Metropolitan Museum. Since I'm dealing a lot with objects that are at least 3,000 and even then 4,000 and 5,000 years old, the question, how does all this survive, comes up again and again. How could it survive for so long? Textiles that are in such prime condition that you could use them for your bedding. And this is only possible because of the very dry climate in Egypt. Natural disasters, like Pompeii, which was covered by the eruption, then excavated, and this beautiful bedchamber is in a condition almost like it must have been when people used it.
So with that's just a snippet of a longer section. But with the release of this series, we went from being a museum with a single institutional voice to a destination with many perspectives, multiple points of view, and radically, a sense of humor. It was barrier-breaking in its format, empowering the visitor to navigate the collection according to their own interests and validating a subjective approach to art that did not begin with scholarship as its primary target. Suddenly, our collections database was not just a catalogue, but a catalyst for curiosity. Connections was liberating for our staff too, and as soon as it was finished, the call came to pursue something new, but equally accessible. Now it was time to blend the openness of Connections with the expertise of the curatorial staff. The result was a web series called 82nd and 5th, which is the street grid location of the Met. So this feature asked each curator to select one work of art that changed the way that he or she saw the world, and to talk about it for 2 minutes. A little challenging, because most of our curators don't just talk for 2 minutes, but our team edited it down ruthlessly, mostly to about 3 minutes. And the effect was very powerful, if not more so. Here we demonstrated that we could deliver substantive commentary on a work of art in a short segment. We also challenged our photographers to develop unique approaches to capturing these objects so that they could tell their story in a way that was visually alluring. We chose not to use video, because in video you just kind of somehow get caught up in I don't know what it is, it's a sort of visual, carries you along. We use still photography to just constantly focus and focus and focus on the art object. So here we're going to hear a short clip by our curator of Islamic art, Navina Haider, talking about a rare manuscript in our one page of a manuscript in our collection. Oh.
We live in a world right now with the daily politics and the newspapers give us the impression that the Islamic tradition is rather rigid, but one of the great masterpieces of world art was really given rise to by the openness of the Muslim mind. It's a lot to put on a little picture like this, but in fact it was that culture of free thinking, of exchange, that in the end created this cultural fabric that is a very strong part of the Indian subcontinent till today.
So again, you have the charm of close-in photography and the sound, the voice of the curator or the conservator. So that was a year-long project with episodes released each week. And like Connections, it lives on our internet, accessible in the galleries if you're in front of the objects, but also accessible remotely for people around the world. The next iteration of this ongoing investigation of what we could do is titled The Artist Project, in which 120 artists talk about one object from the Met collection. It's been fascinating. We realize that some of our most regular visitors are contemporary artists. They know so much about our collections. Even when they're wrong, they're passionate. And we wanted to capture that passion. And so we are now in the final part of this series. We've released 100. We're about to release the last 20. And so I'm going to show you the Sizzle Reel, which gives you an idea of the texture of the different voices.
The room is not just a bedroom, it's also a portrait.
Beckman's painting about the struggle of being human.
I often think looking at art, it's the ultimate escapism.
They're always not like any clouds you've ever really seen, but they're postcard clouds.
I've been rather obsessed with early cycladic figures.
There is this unspeakable cruelty going on, but there are places where one can find peace and beauty.
I wanted him to come to life and be my friend.
They're embodying big ideas, and you can feel within your own body what it's like to be Hercules.
It's a celebration of love, which for me is the highest thing art can do.
Now, obviously, all of these online publications are largely aimed at an adult audience, but there's huge potential for children. And we've also taken on the kids' perspective with a series called Met Kids, which is designed to appeal for 6 to 12-year-olds and with content that is expressly made by children for children. And I'm just going to give you a little clip of one child interviewing or working with one of our curators of the medieval collection.
Hi, I'm Matilda. I'm 10 years old.
I'm Melanie Holcomb, and I'm a curator in the Department of Medieval Art. You can see somebody's just done a little, I don't even know what that is. What do you think that is over there on the left? This little...
Tree, maybe?
A little tree.
Candle?
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you what it is most of the time. Most of the time...
Grocery list?
There are lists sometimes, and most of the time, it's actually correcting mistakes. Because this is a handwritten book, and you can imagine if you're copying, sometimes things get left out, and then another reader comes along and said, well, where's the end of that sentence?
So, we've done 43 of these children's videos, and they're all available in 11 languages with subtitles. Finally, in this digital realm, blogs are becoming an increasingly important way of reaching out. I'm going to give you one final example. Last year, we acquired a wonderful painting by the French master, Charles Lebrun, which was painted in 1664 of the great French collector, Everard Jarbach, whose engravings and print collection actually ended up going to Louis XIV and becoming the bedrock of the drawings and prints collection at the Louvre. And we had to conserve this painting. And so the head of our conservation department, Michael Gallagher, and the head of our paintings department, Keith Christensen, ended up in a kind of dueling blog as to who could go one better than the other as they burrowed into this work and researched it. And we put videos online with the blogs showing the conservation of this painting. And I'm just going to show this because it's always such a delight. I think if I were to die and come back, I would want to come back as a paintings conservator because I think they're magicians.
This varnish is probably at least 100 years old, very thickly applied, so it's discolored very, very strongly indeed. What always tends to happen is the varnish takes a little while to swell, and then it sort of lifts away very cleanly from a paint surface like this. Taking a really, really discolored varnish off a superbly preserved paint film, it's really satisfying. Now the cleaning is finished, the next step is to deal with the structural issues. When the painting was turned over a smaller stretcher at the beginning of the 20th century, it caused, obviously, a rupture in the paint film. The bigger problem, in a sense, was almost caused when it was turned back expediently in 2012, resulting in a lot of distortion. And that distortion basically bisected the picture. The painting is a rather stiff structure, and so the issue was to carefully take out that distortion to bring the whole support back into plane. Once it was off the stretcher and the strip lining had been removed and the excess wax had been removed, my time was taken with the structural intervention. Moisture, pressure, heat is a classic trio for dealing with canvas distortions. The painting is just over 11 feet. It's roughly about 10 sections of doing this. I leave it overnight each time, and I may have to repeat it in places. And then the roller will come into play. The tube will be used to roll up the entire painting so that it can be turned over so that the face is visible. And I can work on it from the front. On the whole, I'm very, very happy with it. The picture is in plane. I think when you see it now, you see the sweep of the composition. Your eye isn't interrupted by that unfortunate severe distortion at the top of the canvas where it had been turned back and part of the picture's history. The next steps, the actual stretching process. I've attached already a new strip lining which will facilitate that. Varnish has, in this period of painting, the main role is optical. And in order to get the full tonal value of the colours and tones, you need a saturating varnish. Where it's cleaned and is without varnish at the moment, it's rather matte and desaturated. So a final stage in the treatment will be to apply varnish. Essentially, the picture is in wonderful condition, but there's obviously retouching needed along the break. But there's also some little scratches and a few little losses in the painting. Time-consuming, but minor.
It's a question of don't try that at home. Leave it to the experts. So there used to be a fear that our online access would stop people coming to the museum. But in fact, we find the opposite is true. Just as the televising of sports, for example, has resulted in a massive new audience, physical audience, for sports events, I believe that we have a huge potential if we use the digital world intelligently to bring our mission to whole new audiences and introduce them to the significance and the creativity both of historical art and of contemporary art. So the Met, I think it's fair to say, over the last 146 years, has become a global museum for a global city. New York has always been a crossroads for the world's cultures. No matter where you're from, you can find your history at the Met. Our founding mandate to educate and inspire the public by presenting the greatest artistic achievements of humankind still anchors our thinking about what the museum should always aspire to be, both online and in our galleries. I look now at the cultural destruction going on in places like Syria and Iraq, and I'm grateful for the vision of our founders in making the Met an international museum. We all feel helpless when we see our shared heritage in peril. But it's our hope that the Met, along with our colleagues, like the Kunsthistorisches Museum, can continue to reach out and to help our colleagues in areas like Syria and Iraq through conservation training, collection documentation, and translations. And perhaps most importantly, we can raise awareness of these rich civilizations through our collecting and programming. Indeed, if the tale of the Met has a recurrent theme, it's that for nearly a century and a half, those who have guided its growth have sought to make it something more than just a treasury of great art. Our success fosters an understanding of all art and culture, and in turn encourages a broader perspective on the world in which we now live. We are all so connected because of the digital realm, but the irony of that connection is that we are all more connected than ever to misunderstanding, to reactionary points of views, to the negative, the evil. And I believe that we play an incredibly important part in pushing back against that, in populating the internet with the positive, with the thoughtful, with the long-term view. So in a way, that vision is grounded in our founder's vision of 1870, and we aspire to continue it today. Thank you.